submitting from our special education system, whether it's SACE, Cyrus, Fawcett, CEASE, all right, all that data is going to be relayed to you on reports, and the data that's in these reports is then provided for accountability and used for accountability in CDE, but it's also used to meet the requirements and the mandates of the IDEA. And so some of the more, like I said, some of the data types, you guys should be very familiar with these, more so than myself. So I'll go quickly through the next several slides. However, Brandy's here and Joe's here, so if you need additional clarification or relevance, please ask the questions, because this is a great opportunity for you. And maybe my expectations of what you know is misinformed, right? And so the District of Special Education Accountability, right, is basically the district or charter LEA responsible for ensuring that special education services are provided for each student and participating in special education. And we all know that we're the most populous state in the country, and we probably have the largest number of students. Therefore, it's reason to assume we have the largest number of special education students. And so there's various ways we provide our services for these students. And so it's not always so easy to identify which district is the District of Special Education Accountability. And so because of that, we'll show you, or Kyron will show you in a demonstration shortly, that there is a report provided for you that helps determine and identifies which, it doesn't determine, but it does identify the District of Special Education Accountability. And then each record, and you'll see this on the reports, has a special education meeting type, right? And so it's very important that not just those annual or triennial meetings that are required or reported for students with IEPs and IFSPs and ISPs, but also those reasons why a student doesn't have services or hasn't yet been evaluated, like pending. You need to report those. We know that perhaps you've identified a student and was referred for services, but the pandemic hit and we're all on a type of a quarantine and you haven't been able to evaluate the student. It would be reasonable and appropriate for you to submit a pending status for that student, because that student was identified. And of course, there's child find requirements. So you want to make sure that those students that are found ineligible are reported as well, or those that are eligible and decline services. And so the special education meeting type code is a key data element. And then, of course, meeting delay codes, especially in the current environment that we're in, will be key element as well. And so the meeting delay codes are available for meetings that have been delayed. They represent the reason why the meeting date exceeds the required timeline. However, the code should be put on the record once the meeting is held, right? This is not a reason why we have not yet had the meeting. It's a reason why the meeting was held, but it was late. If you do not have if you have a meeting that has been delayed and you have not been able to hold it, don't do anything yet. Don't submit Shiloh is very clear. She likes to say, don't submit fake meetings. You can see that in the fourth bullet down. Do not have a fake meeting. Wait until you actually have the meeting with your students and their family, and then to explain why the meeting was late.
Okay, so I've been getting inundated with these questions. So I just want to be clear about what this means. There's a difference between what you're doing in your local special education data system with respect to all of the COVID-19 delays, and then what's in CalPADS. So let me be really clear about it. A lot of you are actually entering in transactions into SACE or Cyrus or Fawcett or WebIEP or Welligent. You're entering in those transactions with a future meeting date, because the intent is that you will probably, you will hold that meeting eventually, and you're putting a delay code on that transaction with a future meeting date. Okay, can you do that? If that is your process locally, that's fine. However, you cannot send that transaction up to CalPADS until the meeting has actually occurred. Okay, so a lot of you are saying, well, how do I tell you why my meetings haven't been held? Bottom line is you can't do that until you actually hold the meeting. Okay, a delay code, when you send it up, is applicable to the meeting in that record. Okay, so if you hold a meeting on October 1st that has been delayed, several months because of COVID-19, then when you finally affirm, you hold the meeting, you affirm that student's education plan, you can put the meeting delay code on that record, but do not send it up until the meeting is held. Okay, if you try to go into CalPads right now or send up meeting delay codes on the prior meeting, it's going to fudge all of the data. It's going to skew it. So do not put meeting delay codes on records until the meeting has actually been held, and then tell us why it's been delayed. Okay, so again, you can go ahead and update your systems with a future meeting date and put a delay code on that record, but don't send it up to CalPads until you hold the meeting.
So do we all understand Brandy's direction on this? If you don't, this is your opportunity. It's pretty clear to me, but I'm not responsible for anything. All right, so we're going to move on. And so here's some guidance. This was provided in the SIM, so it's not new, but due to the COVID-19 quarantine, when you are having these meetings and you're going to be explaining the reasons why, just become familiar with the meeting delay code. So 20 could be a reason, and that's the parent did not make the student available. Code 60 is emergency, right? And there's more codes than just these 3 that we're showing you, but they're just examples. And then perhaps code 75 is just simply school closure, right? And so the facilities and access to staff weren't available necessarily for the students, and the staff didn't have access to the students. So just review the CalPads code set when you are submitting these records and find the most appropriate delay reason code. And so this also brings the importance of submitting records with an amendment date rather than a duplicate record. And so the education plan amendment date reflects the date in which services changed that were defined in the IEP or ISP or IFSP. Every IEP meeting has a subsequent amendment and is uploaded to CalPads. So if you have an amendment, you upload it to CalPads to reflect the data changes. If the LEA uploads the record that has the same date, but something has changed, it must have an amendment date. Otherwise, you'll get a duplicate record. And so most of the data is the same, except for the small amendments. You have to have an amendment date to differentiate the record. If you upload an amendment date and attempt to change a field that would only be held during an official meeting, or then you are going to get the SPED error 438. So these have been pretty common, and that's why we're taking the time to explain them. And then if you upload the record and it determines that the error and the needs to be changed, you should delete the erroneous record and add the correct record. And so this last bullet, you may have to work with your special education vendor in resolving the 441 and the 438.
We do plan on documenting some of this and putting it in a flash as well.
Yeah, we're working on it actually today. Hopefully it'll get out today or tomorrow or Monday.
And so every SPED record has an education plan type code. And again, the most familiar ones are those that are related to those active plans, the IFSP, the IEP, and the ISP, right? And these are your active plan. But there's other reasons, other education plan type codes. So if you, again, have a student that's evaluated and they either decline or found ineligible, that's reported through an education plan type. Or if you have a student that's pending. So the title of the field can be a little bit misleading. And then I expect you guys I expect you all to know who's eligible for our IFSP, our IEP, and ISP. If not, please get our attention, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. And then the disability category. This hasn't changed from CalPADS. It's the same as it was in CASEMIS. It's just the federal disabilities that make a student eligible for special education related services. And another field that you see represented in the reports is the special education program setting. And it's the environment in which the student is receiving the majority of their special education and related instruction or related services. And then work-based learning indicators are pretty significant, and I'll let Brandy tell you why. She does it a lot better than I do.
So the work-based learning indicators in CalPADS are being used for the California School Dashboard. So it's trying to basically give more career measures for students with disabilities. And these two indicators are currently in your special education data systems. Okay. What we did find out recently is that because of the file type that they're currently on the SPED file. Most of the time, you guys are not actually updating these until you actually hold some type of meeting, okay? Because transactions in your system are generated usually when you hold some sort of amendment meeting or initial evaluation or annual IEP or a triennial. And what we really need is for these specific indicators to be updated at the end of the year, because that's when we pull them for purposes of accountability. So we did have a meeting with your special education vendors yesterday where we talked about this. We do know that because of the way that the data are collected in your special ed systems right now, you may not actually be able to get up the most current data for these students unless, for whatever reason, they actually held a meeting towards the end of the year. So these two data elements very likely will be taken out of your special education data systems next year. And they will be collected very likely in the student information system. So we just wanted to give you an idea of that. But they're important because we want to know whether or not students in grades 9 through 12 have completed either 100 hours of transition work-based experience, meaning they're in a workplace, paid or unpaid, and they're getting actual work experience, 100 hours in grades 9 through 12. And then the next one is classroom-based work experience or college or career preparation courses. They have to have taken at least the equivalent of 4 courses of classroom-based career and college readiness, right? So, but we need your help along with the student information system coordinator in identifying students who have actually completed or met one of these requirements. So I would say do the best you can this year, and then the accountability office will take a look at the data that are submitted to see whether or not they would be included in the career and college readiness indicator.
Thank you, Brandy. And you know, there's specific funding. The CD has an entire page dedicated to workability. So there's funding specific to these programs that give the students with disabilities kind of a career-minded education. And I've read that it's essential in their development and becoming independent, kind of self-sufficient adults as well. So you don't want to overlook these two indicators.
The other thing I wanted to mention is it's not limited to workability, right? There's Department of Rehab, Student Services, and workability programs, but these indicators are not limited to those 2 programs. They include, but not limited to.
Thank you. And then all that data is coming from the special education file, right? The several fields that we covered and many more. There's 57 individual elements. But now let's talk about services, right? And so the service is largely represented in the Special Education Service Code, and it just describes the student service they receive. And of course, multiple services can be reported or submitted for a student. And we also want to know who's providing that service and the location. And so pretty straightforward, the location code describes where the student's receiving the service, and the service provider describes who is or what is the entity providing the service. So, you know, a student may be receiving the service at a regional center, county office, maybe they're just the school or the SELPA, right? And then who's providing that service? It could be the county office, it could be the LEA, it could be the local district. The frequency and duration of those services is also important. So how often, the service frequency refers to how often the service is provided, and the duration is how long each session goes for. And then the single element, the post-secondary status, is a small file. The single significant element is the result of the student, or what the outcome is. And so you do the survey. This is nothing new. And then you go ahead and report, the results of that survey. There's two things to note, right? This is the only functionality in CalPADS that you can do online. So you can submit this record via API from your special education system, and then do it online. And the reason why we mentioned that is the students may have more than one outcome, and it has been brought to my attention that specific vendors only allow you to submit one outcome. So if you wanted to submit a second after you've posted the records in that file or submitted the file via API, you could go ahead and use online maintenance and add another record. However, if you are satisfied and only get one result and you want to know the hierarchy, I'll let Brandy tell you the hierarchy. I believe it's education first.
Yeah, exactly. So education will always come first, and then employment, and then military, right? So and obviously the rest are sort of self-explanatory. But one thing that I would like to say is that a lot of you have been doing these follow-up surveys, and again, they can be done via phone, email, U.S. Postal Service, social media, whatever outlet you use in order to reach out to these kids. You should continue to do that. But some of you are indicating that you're calling these students and you're getting in touch with them and you're finding out, oh, well, they were employed, but then COVID-19 hit and then they've been unemployed. So obviously that student was gainfully employed prior to the crisis. So if you have to choose when they were employed, because they actually had a job. And very likely, once things relax a little bit, they will actually be able to go back to that job. So if their circumstances have changed due to COVID-19, I would recommend that you use their pre-COVID-19 circumstances, because that's really what they're trying to gather here. Also, if you're not able to contact kids or they refuse to answer, we have two options at the very bottom that tell CalPADS that you tried to contact them, but you were not able to contact them or they refused to answer.
And Brandy, so there was a question here about regarding SACE. SACE takes 1819 to mean June 30. Wouldn't that be include up to 815? Shouldn't that include up to 815 graduates?
Yeah, it would. It would include any student that graduated all the way through our graduate from date or graduate through date, which is August 15th, 2019. And again, I wanted to clarify because I had a couple of questions in here. A lot of you think that you only have to report the post-secondary status file for students who graduated, and that's not true, okay? If they exited secondary education in 2018-19, that means if they took and passed the GED, the high school proficiency exam, if they received a certificate of complete, dropped out, they were deceased, they not deceased, but they left for medical reasons. Bottom line is they were enrolled in the 2018-19 academic year. They were a student with disabilities. They did not re-enroll in 2019-20. They weren't being served at all. Then you report a post-secondary status record for them.
And so the last time we had this webinar, the PST has dominated the questions, and it seems that you guys understand pretty much what Brandy and Kyron have shared with you. If not, feel free to ask the question. I'm trying to delay to see if there's anything relevant while Brandy has the floor in the Q&A. And so
I'm scrolling through, I'm trying to see, can Brandy repeat the hierarchy? So it's schooling, employment, military, and then everything else.
We'll get that documented somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Our district in elementary is elementary middle school. Yeah, so if you don't have any high school kids, you can't report on their post-secondary status. Correct, Martin. If we don't hear back from the student, are we supposed to select 950, not able to contact? Yeah. So if you reached out, you want to tell the department that you reached out, but you never heard back. Okay. Let's see. Could you please clarify again the process for entering responses to post-secondary and employment for our indicator 14 entries? So I'm assuming they're talking about, so again, in SACE, in your special education data systems, they only allow for one response, okay? So you can go ahead and pick the response based on that hierarchy that we just talked about. So school, employment, military, then everything else, okay? If for whatever reason the student gives you more than one response, you can actually log into CalPads, into our online maintenance portal, and you can add those additional statuses if you want. Then when we analyze the data, the special education division will pick the highest level and report that to the feds.
And so you guys are welcome to keep the questions coming. But we're going to transition now. We've been doing this for an hour, so we're going to take a 5-minute break.